Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine war news update. First part thereof for the 16th of May 2020. I should remember that, it's my partner's birthday. Oops. Here's a news update. It is National Vyshyvanka Day. I remember that word. It's a difficult word to remember. Best remembered, as someone advised me, with Rishi Wanka Day. So sorry if you're a big fan of Rishi Sunak, but he does enable me to remember that I should be at present wearing that shirt just there. So with some amazing IT skills, check this out. How clever is that? Check me. Vishy Vanka. Anyway, onwards and upwards, or sideways or downwards, I don't know. We go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. Another heavy day of heavy losses. 1,520 personnel lost. Of course, adding that northern axis to the front line and seeing how dynamic it is, how hot it is in terms of attacks. There's no surprise that there's 1,520 personnel lost, and that is... would have been a record day, but there was that 1,780 the other day. Right, 19 tanks, 30 armoured personnel vehicles, and 27 artillery systems. That's all high numbers those are all high numbers in those categories. 19 tanks is going to be a sore loss, surely, as is, 30 APVs and 27 artillery systems. 93 vehicles and fuel tanks is a record. That I think 91 was a previous record, and then we have one piece of special equipment. Oh no, by the looks of it, it was, and I know my face is somewhat in the way, but it was 85 previously. This is Dell's data sheet here, the Excel spreadsheet that is linked on all of my hits and losses videos. So that is just a huge number, right? Obviously, there is a pretty large set of numbers over the last few months as the Russians have lost an awful lot of vehicles and fuel tanks. If we look at Bill's stats, actually that's from yesterday, those stats, but he has got that up, it has pulled through the data for the maximum 93, so that is the biggest we have seen. Goodness me. So yeah, that is a tough day in that category. One piece of special equipment, obviously much lower there, but yeah, the Russians are surely unable to sustain losses like that over too long a time period. Right, as far as Andrew Perpetua's lost stats are concerned, this is what he put out almost a day ago now, so these are fairly old. I didn't go through them. This didn't come out in time from yesterday's one. This came out just after. I did mention it in a future video, but it was, I haven't gone through the details here, and Andrew said there was an incredible amount of content yesterday. I started working at 2 a.m, worked until 10 p.m, then woke up at 4 a.m. and worked until now, almost 6 a.m. I mean, that man just gets no sleep. It's just incredible the work he does. 191 videos, which I personally processed around 140 to 150. I really hope today isn't as insane. Well, who knows? But that is a phenomenal amount of kit. Okay, and then we'll come to the Russian losses in a second. As you can see, ratio-wise, probably a 2-to-1, just under 2-to-1. So that is in favour of the Ukrainians, but probably not quite enough. It depends what sort of losses there are here. Quite a few surveillance and comms, a few Starlinks thrown in. I wouldn't bother necessarily adding those to the lists. There is a Tunguska short-range air defense system taken out by Lancet, damaged there. We get down to radar, P-18 Malachite radar. That's going to be a bit of a sore loss. Artillery, we have another Bogdana, a BM-21 Grad, multiple launch rocket system, just a couple of tanks, M113 or YPR, the Dutch equivalent, Dutch variant, Senator. They're one of the Rochelle senators. They've had over 1,000 of those delivered, and we don't actually see too many of them taken out, so I presume they're not used too close to the front line. I think they're more about sort of getting troops around in general, as opposed to using them right on the front lines. But anyway, that's a fairly high number of losses, nothing too serious. Yes, a radar, yes, a short-range air defense system. For the Russians, we have some surveillance and comms as well. We have, I wouldn't include that ground drone, to be honest. We have two BM-21 Grads, so 2 multiple launch rocket systems, range of artillery there, number of tanks, including 2 turtle tanks. I saw a turtle tank fundamentally disassemble. It can't be one of those because there's no way you would just have that as damaged. It absolutely it was some self-destruction going on there because I'm sure things inside cooked off and it was a huge explosion. Anyway, other tanks included there. Oh, there's 3. That'll be the one, the turtle tank T-62. That one destroyed. I missed that one. So yeah, 3 turtle tanks there, which shows, 1, they're using them a lot, the Russians, for them to be destroyed more, and 2, it means the Ukrainians have worked out ways of destroying them. Infantry fighting vehicles, number of those, that's to be expected. In fact, all of them destroyed. Interesting. APC, most of those destroyed. Most of them MTLBs. The stockpiles of those are very low on the ground by all accounts. Trucks, a number of Ural trucks, ATVs, 4-wheelers, quads, and we have a golf cart as well thrown in. And then a number of civilian vehicles and unknown vehicles. Remember, 93 civilian vehicles were lost yesterday. This will be referring to the day before. And of course, with all these data lists, it's going to be compiled from montages that may stretch over weeks, maybe even longer. It depends on what units put them together. But anyway, that just gives you an indication. I like just going through these lists because over time they do give you a balance of what is taking place. Now, Sean Pinner, I interviewed Sean Pinner. Please go and check that interview out on my live tab because it was fantastic. He was fighting Mariupol, captured by the Russians, tortured and swapped in a prisoner exchange with Medvedchuk, among others. Him and others. But he criminally underviewed that video. Please go and check it out. He says, people ask me how daily figures are calculated. Well, there are so many ways to obtain this information. Russia uses open frequency radios like Motorola's and even uses the same code numbers for dead and injured, intercepted communications, body counts on the ground, recorded footage, satellite information, and social media. It is centrally collected, and estimates are distributed by the Ukrainian military, but are generally more accurate than Russia. Do you remember the Bradley fighting vehicles that the Russians destroyed before they even reached Ukraine? You can expect to lose 3-1 on any offensive. So the approximately 6,000 Russian casualties in 4 days isn't surprising, to be fair, sometimes losing the equivalent of 2 to 3 battalions per day. Remember, casualties are dead, injured, captured, and missing. So that's him giving the methods that the Ukrainians use to compile their statistics. And there are criteria, and units do submit them centrally. And I have often said that if any of the numbers here are inaccurate, it's going to be the personnel numbers, because there's an awful lot of guesstimation that goes on with those, especially when you're hitting buildings. You look, I showed you, or I referenced a bit of footage of drone completely destroying a building where you'd seen 20 people go in that building and then it gets destroyed. But you're guessing how many are dead or injured in that. You don't know 100% whether all of them were affected, whether some clearly and properly survived, whether people had walked out that building in the meantime unseen, so on and so forth. So an awful lot of guesstimation that takes place with these numbers. Whereas when you're talking about tanks, you literally, well, there's video evidence of that. It's geolocated. That is a tank that's blown up, destroyed, captured, abandoned, whatever. And you can't really argue with that. But the personnel figures are definitely open to inaccuracies. And I believe also aircraft from the beginning, aircraft and helicopters, I think they were skewed. Those numbers are skewed. I think they're accurate kind of now, as in when you see them add figures. Like, for example, they don't add them particularly when you have the strikes on the air bases and things like that. They don't seem to add them there. They seem to be from really well evidenced stuff that you see on social media more than you see from, say, you'd imagine you'd see from good quality satellite imagery. So yeah, those 3 top statistics there would be the ones that I would question the most, and these other ones would have a lot more rationale behind them, I believe. For example, that that picture there. Just not too much in this section to add. I'm just going to add this one. So Russians are short of meat waves, said PS01. In Krasnodar, about 20 conscripts are forcibly held in a collection point. They came to the military registration and enlistment office to confirm their unfitness for service. According to one of the guys, he suffers from a number of diseases that prevent him from being sent to serve. He confirmed this data with medical certificates. Today, he was invited to the recruiting station on Yaroslavskaya for a control medical examination. For the same purpose, 19 more people unfamiliar to him came there. So there's 20 of them, didn't know each other. They were unfit to serve, as according to their paperwork. At some point, the military commissars took away the men's documents, assigned them the rank of private, and told them to wait to be sent to the military unit in Kurganist. According to the conscript, they are forced to change into uniform and are threatened with physical force if they refuse. An ambulance and police officers were called to the scene, but at the moment, this has had no result. So that's an example of how people unfit to serve are being forced to serve. And that would only happen if you desperately needed boots on the ground. So anyway, it's an anecdote, but something worth considering. Right, we're going to move on to strikes now. There were explosions and missiles heard in Sevastopol near Belbek airfield, Simferopol and Jankoy. So it appears that a number of places on Crimea were targeted last night, including Belbek Air Base again, which I find interesting because I talked about that exactly yesterday, that the S-400 system, the radar was affected. So now's your time to hit that, as there will be a hole in air defences. And now's the time to hit other places in Crimea that air defence battery would have been protecting. So it doesn't just protect Belbek Air Base, obviously has quite a large range, and there will be no other air defences in that, or there might be slightly overlapping areas, but you have holes in air defence. Now's your time to hit Crimea. Lo and behold, the next night, Crimea is hammered by ATACMS. So I don't know too much about the damage that was done last night. We'll look at some details concerning Belbek Air Base. Unconfirmed reports in Crimea that an oil depot may have been hit. At the start of the day, the attack on Belbek is said to have wiped out a warehouse of rockets and missiles, many used by Russia's planes to bomb Ukraine, although info is yet to be verified. There was also the claim from Russian sources, this one from Dvar Majors, a Russian channel, confirming Ukrainian naval drone activity west of Crimea. In fact, Rebar reported on that as well. Russian military channel Rebar, they had maps of where all the drones came from. Russian military channel Rebar claims that a large number of Ukrainian surface drones that entered the Black Sea waters yesterday during the drone and missile attack on Crimea have not been deployed to attack targets and are currently on standby. This is something I've talked about previously with regard to underwater drones. I believe they've been developing sort of submarine drones or kind of torpedo drones. The idea is, any person with a bit of common sense will work out that what you want to do is get your drones to hang around outside ports, because there are booms across ports and you can't get submarine drones, you can't get surface drones easily into the ports to blow up ships. What you want is to just have them waiting outside port. And even if the ships don't come out and don't get blown up, they're not being used. You're changing the behaviour. So that's really effective. And it could be that the Ukrainians are trying something like that out, that they're waiting to strike anything that comes out of shelter into the Black Sea. And that's indeed what Rebar is basically saying out. Belbek Air Base in Russian-occupied Crimea burns tonight after successful Ukrainian ATACMS strike. So this is a firms data from yesterday, May the 14th, as in the night going from 14th into the 15th, so 2 nights ago. And this is the firms data from last night. Very similar, not identical, but it goes to show that they have hammered Belbek twice in the same places, give or take. NASA firms data, Belbek Air Base past 2 nights. The past 2 nights, Ukraine has reportedly targeted it with ATACMS. Needless to say, it's been a miserable 2 days for the occupiers in Crimea. Tough luck. More complaints from Russian military bloggers about successful strikes by Ukrainian defense forces against targets in temporarily occupied Crimea, says War Translated. So we're going to go through this. This is a fairly interesting one from a Russian source. The massive attacks on Crimea that have begun with ATACMS missiles received from the United States as part of a new funding package has forced us to ask very uncomfortable questions to the commander of the Russian aerospace forces. How did it happen that 27 months after the start of the war, military airfields and air defence positions in Crimea are in no way prepared in engineering terms? Why weren't protective structures erected for military equipment and warehouses on the territory that even the Western curators of the Armed Forces of Ukraine consider a legitimate target for airstrikes? Just 2 years ago, our engineers proposed for production protective hangars for aircraft from prefabricated steel elements, which were reinforced on the outside with earth or gabions and reliably covered aircraft from the main hovercraft. I don't know what that means, maybe from drones. But not a single hangar like this was ever built. During the same time, we lost so many aircraft on the ground from airborne weapons that its cost was many times higher than the cost of capital reinforced concrete shelters for aircraft in the entire European part of Russia. Why wasn't this done? This is actually a common complaint, is that the Russians don't have protective hangars for their aircraft in many of their air bases. Why, 27 months after the start of the air defense system, are our air defense systems still standing in open spaces and not even covered with ordinary gabions? I'm not sure that word, I've not seen that before, but anyway, some kind of protective covering, not to mention anti-fragmentation curtains. Why are warehouses with open storage of equipment, weapons, ammunition and fuels and lubricants still used in Crimea? Since last autumn, we have been warning that the armed forces of Ukraine will concentrate all their forces on attacks on Crimea, and we explain that for Kyiv, nightmare in Crimea is perhaps the only way to demonstrate its successes. And it's very sad to see that the commander of the aerospace forces treated this threat carelessly. So some really well-justified complaints there from a Russian source about the state of affairs in Crimea with regard to air defense systems and the protection of their airframes. Overnight, Ukrainian ATACMS strike on Belbek reportedly struck a warehouse with missiles for Su-30, Su-27 and MiG-31 fighter jets, reports Atesh Crimean Partisan Group. So it looks like explosions of munitions were part of the course last night. The partisans claim that the damaged depot stored most of the missiles for Russian Su-27 and Su-30 fighter jets, as well as MiG-31 aircraft, a carrier of Kinzhal ballistic missiles that Russia uses to attack Ukraine. The partisans did not explicitly say whether the stored ammunition included Kinzhals, though. And Kyiv's ATACMS strike on Belbek military airfield near Sevastopol took out, so this is from the night before. This is slightly changing what might have been hit there. 2 MiG-31 aircraft, S-400 anti-aircraft complex, and a fuel warehouse. 11 Russians were injured. Another S-400 platform was hit in Vishnovo, 70 kilometers from Belbek, where other people were killed and injured as well. So Astra, the Russian media source, confirming some losses there from the night before. And Thomas Steiner has a really good point here. So, looking at this kind of footage where you see the S-400 radar system taken out, damage possibly, well, the claim from Astra is that a whole complex was taken out. Russia's most modern weapon systems, so the S-400, are all inferior to US weapon systems introduced in the 1980s. So this S-400 that you would assume should be good at detecting targets like ATACMS missiles, acquiring those targets and shooting them down, gets destroyed by those very missiles. Looking forward to F-16 proving that point all over again next month. I know people are saying F-16 shouldn't be a panacea, but I think you're seeing a shaping of the battlefield now that will allow F-16s to have a greater effect and will also protect those F-16s more. So you've got two aspects going on there. F-16s will not get shot down as easily if these air defense systems are being shot down, and also the F-16s will have a greater effect on being able to hit their own targets. There's possibly a lot of hopium in me. Like I really obviously hope that F-16s are really successful. I'm often constrained by like, yeah, they're not going to be a panacea. It's not going to be, let's be realistic about this. But things are looking better and better with each passing week at the moment, with the use of things like ATACMs that are really shaping the battlefield for the eventual F-16 usage. Right, and moving on, we have another Russian source here, another interesting insight. Russian StormZ instructor and blogger assesses the damage caused by Ukrainian strikes on the Russian frontline aviation infrastructure, as well as strikes on the energy sector, as serious. According to him, this poses a serious threat to the Russian army's ability to carry out strikes with glide bombs. Exactly what is needed for the Ukrainians, because those airframes with those guided glide bombs, the card bombs, are so much of a problem for the Ukrainians. Let's start with the good. Our aerial bombs, he says, of various calibers have begun to be equipped with the new control modules, which provide higher accuracy, i.e. become even more effective means of powerful remote destruction. And now about the not good stuff. So it looks like there's going to be a lot worse news than good news. Although that is worrying that the already effective aviation bombs are becoming even more effective and efficient. Let's go back a month to a post in which I cited enemy concerns regarding the steadily increasing influence of our airstrike component and assumptions regarding countermeasures. Let me remind you that Mr. Kovalenko then voiced the following options. Either we work against carriers, which is now impossible to implement in a systematic way, or we impact other sectors and areas of Russian operational forces, the destruction of which, while maintaining the dominance of carbs, will still weaken the occupiers on the ground. And now a month passes, during which we observe and feel, firstly, the enemy's fairly systematic work on our refineries and oil depots. Secondly, which is typical, the increasing systematicity of work on air defense systems, like we've just seen in Crimea, right? Airfield infrastructure, like we've just seen in Crimea, right? And directly to the carriers of those same carbs, like we just seen in Crimea, right? In the reach of the enemy's long-range weapons. Thus, the enemy has fully reflected on the growing risks and is organising systematic work on our frontline aviation and air defence systems, including those covering our airfields, which still do not have adequate shelters to prevent aircraft from being hit by at least fragmentation elements of cluster munitions, which is what the previous commenter also said. Maybe we should somehow start scratching our heads more actively in terms of our own countermeasures, including in a proactive manner. Just look at it. Our frontline aviation will be significantly thinned out, then our glide bombs will cry, and after them our ground operations, and the damage caused is measured in quite a few billions. So that's a bit of a negative outlook from that Russian analyst there. Now, Artur Rei has his own analysis here of Putin and a very negative outlook for Putin. I've been quite not dooming of late, but the Kharkiv Kharkiv offensive has made me think several different things. At some points, I think, it's just a stupid place to attack, and those troops would be better placed somewhere else on the front line. And then sometimes I think, they are stretching the Ukrainians, and actually the Ukrainians have done a bad job of defending that area. They appear to have picked it up now and have stabilized that area. Most analysts agree that actually the Russians haven't achieved as much in the last 24 hours and have taken some heavy losses. We'll see whether that is true. But Artur Rei here says, so I've been up and down. And sometimes I look at the bigger picture and think, Russia are in a bit of trouble. You look at those anecdotes of getting together basically unfit people to throw them into the front lines because you're so desperate for troops, and you look at stockpiles of howitzers and MTLBs and other pieces of kit, and you think, well, Russia are genuinely running out of stuff. And then you look at their requirements for ammunition coming from North Korea, because why else would they get 11,000 containers of North Korean ammunition if they weren't desperate for it, for them? So on and so forth. You piece all this stuff together and you think, I think Russia really are in quite a brittle situation, and it's only that Ukraine have been buggered by 7 months of lack of ammunition themselves and 7 months of not mobilizing effectively enough, that Russia have been able to appear to be more powerful, I think, than they really are. And these movements inside the Russian military hierarchy, moving Shoigu, moving Patrushev, getting Belousov in, getting rid of the people under, it would have been then Shoigu, and so on and so forth, a big clear out, is a sign that things aren't going well. Now, on the other hand, you do often have clear outs. In the Second World War, like the UK moved on loads of generals, like consistently. And actually, when we see Ukraine doing this, everyone goes, "Oh, that's terrible." But actually, those generals do need to get moved on, and you need fresh ideas and so on and so forth. But I think those kind of changes in the Russian MOD are much more of a bigger level of thinking. It's not like your colonels and generals and people down here. It's your defense ministers who aren't even prosecuting the war. You've got Gerasimov, who's gone AWOL, who's supposed to be the commander-in-chief. You've got the idea that Surovikin's going to replace him sometime soon. He's been exiled to Africa. So it just is not looking like all is well behind the scenes with Russia. So Artur Rei says this for what it's worth. Let's just have a look at what he says. What Putin won't tell you, Russia is in much deeper trouble than it seems. Analysis by Yoni Askola, Finnish PhD candidate, trying to help Ukraine there. So, Belousov's appointment, the ongoing purge in the MOD, and the multi-directional offensive all indicate that Russia recognises the urgency of the situation it is facing. The clock is ticking and Putin knows it. I think this is really interesting, that the idea that actually he's under quite a lot of pressure to get stuff done quickly. There's 2 years plus into the war. Putin may have failing health. He's got an economy that is on a precipice. He's got a population that aren't exactly enamored with what's going on at the moment. You've got flooding going on behind the scene, in some of the regions in Russia. It's just all building up, and actually time is running out for him to come away with some major successes. 2 years, and you might think the last few months has been successful, like, oh my goodness, what's happened at Avdiivka? But you look at where the map was 2 years ago, when most of the you had most of the northeast of Ukraine was under Russian control, up to Kiev, up to Kharkiv, around Sumy, and then the eastern front lines, the southern front lines, more of Kherson. Then that went backwards. Then we've had minuscule advances, really, from the Russian army, the second greatest army in the world. Yeah, we're all getting worried about Avdiivka, Ocheritina, and Robotna, and these kind of small places. Bakhmut is the biggest success they've really had, and that cost them 50,000 people. It is not going well, and he needs to show success. Anyway, Belousov's appointment, the ongoing purge of the MOD, and the multi-directional offensive all indicate that Russia recognises the urgency of the situation it's facing. The clock is ticking and Putin knows it. Following Shoigu's dismissal and Belousov's appointment, a purge is underway in the Russian MOD. The purge began several weeks ago with Ivanov's arrest, that's a 2IC, and in the last few days many individuals have been dismissed or even arrested, and some have resigned as well. Belousov's appointment highlights the finite nature of Russia's resources. As an economist and auditor, his objective is to enhance the efficiency of Russia's MOD and defence industries. The necessity for such measures implies that Russia's resources are not abundant. And that's what I've said. I said this is bad news for Ukraine because he's probably the right person in the job. But he's the right person for that job precisely because Russia don't have enough resources, and they need him, right? Otherwise, you'd have a military person doing that overtly military job. But you've got an economist and a procurement guy doing the MOD job, because they need it. Shoigu, a long-serving minister since 1991, close ally of Putin, would not be dismissed without valid cause. In this instance, Russia's recognition of the inefficiency within its MOD services is the underlying reason for his dismissal. However, appointing Belousov may be a misstep for Russia, as noted by this other person. So that is Ilya Andreev. Shoigu, despite being corrupt and disregarding efficiency, was able to make swift and resource-intensive moves that contributed to Russia's few strengths in this conflict. Belousov's appointment could lead to long-term improvements in the MOD's efficiency and reduction in corruption. However, this may also result in internal conflicts that necessitate more bureaucracy, slower decision making, and more careful spending to achieve these goals. Finally, Russia's offensive from multiple directions indicates a sense of urgency, recognizing that time is running out. Ukraine is expected to mobilize and receive substantial aid by year's end, prompting Russia to attempt to secure as much ground as possible before then. If Ukraine can endure without enduring substantial territorial and human losses, Russia will find itself in an extremely difficult and unwinnable protracted conflict. These are the fundamental reasons for Putin's current pushes on the front and to reform the MOD. Now, that is a very positive outlook for Ukraine, but I think it has a lot of merit as well. You know, you don't start fixing things if they ain't broke. So they are broken, which is why Putin is fixing them. And Russia's numerical advantages on the front line, I think, belie a very brittle situation for their own frontline forces. I think it is challenging for them. Media have published again more pictures of huge numbers of unfinished, seemingly abandoned defences in Kharkiv, as according to Tim White here. This time around 15 kilometres from where the enemy artillery was stationed. That could be why they were abandoned, because it was in artillery range, or it could be because of corruption, or it could be because of just lack of organisation, or whatever the reason is. There are people complaining about the defences in Kharkiv. However, things do seem to have improved there. So breaking news here from PS01 this morning. Ukrainian journalist Butasov, who's embedded with the Ukrainian army in northern Kharkiv, reports that Russian offensive has stalled or stopped. And he's a realist, Butasov. He will not pull the wool over your eyes. He's been very frank about what's happened in Bakhmut and then Avdiivka and now up in Kharkiv. And he was even, while Russia were doing some seemingly fairly decent maneuvers in Kharkiv recently, where they were taking, into Vovchansk, he was still fairly upbeat for Ukraine. So Russians have suffered significant losses while Ukrainian troops have become more effective. Prisoners tell stories of a blitzkrieg, i.e. Vovchansk in 2 days. So that was the intention, Vovchansk in 2 days. Let's read through this because I think it's important to do so. Russian offensive in Kharkiv region, situation on at 11:30 last night. The Russians launched several infantry attacks in the direction of Lipka. All attacks were repulsed with significant Russian losses. In the village of Lyubake, soldiers of the 92nd Assault Brigade destroyed a group of Russian special forces. During a counterattack, 2 Russians from its composition were taken prisoner. The video is posted on the internet. In the same area, the soldiers of the 13th Brigade of the Charter NGU repulsed the attack of the Russian assault group, which approached the position on the Zelenka area. At the decisive moment of the battle, our soldiers shot 2 Russians at close range who were leading the group. Behind him, the Russians began to withdraw under the accurate fire of the Charter troops and came under the attack of drones of the Sharp Kartazy unit of the NSU. About 20 Russians were destroyed. The video will be posted on the internet. That's the area where the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back at Zelena village on the eastern end of the western salient, if you like. There are 2 points that the Russians are attacking. It's that left-hand one, the right-hand side of the left-hand one. The Russians have no advance in the direction of Lipsy. The Ukrainian troops have significantly intensified their attacks on the enemy in this part of the front and gradually capturing a tactical initiative. And then we just go on to say that in the Vovchansk region, so this is that larger town that the Russians have been advancing within, Ukrainian defences have been significantly strengthened. Attacks on the enemy are becoming more effective. The Russians cannot knock out our troops from positions in the city and its surroundings. The Russian offensive in the northern Kharkiv region has actually stopped. Russian shock groups have suffered losses but are not yet defeated, and heavy battles for destruction continue. So, yeah, I think it's worth understanding that this could be one of those big rolls of the dice for Russia, where they've amassed these troops. This is the largest sort of selection of troops, accumulation of troops they have. They've decided to go at it up in Kharkiv rather than deploy them along the front line anywhere else. And we'll see whether this will be worse for the Russians than for the Ukrainians, whether the Ukrainians will do a better job of defending than the Russians do in attacking. And then there are claims that the Russians have taken all of Robotna, They've been coming out over the last couple of days. The Ukrainian military says Ukraine has not lost ground near Robotna in Zaporizhia Oblast, and that around a village of Robotna, and it's still put at least partially under their control. His statement came after the Russian Defense Ministry claimed that the capture of Robotna the day before. Recent days saw an escalation of hostilities in that sector. And then, instead of 1,000 words, here's just a picture just to talk to you of the evacuation. Here we have someone getting out of Dodge in the Vovchansk area, in the Kharkiv area. And it's their livelihoods. You know, you think, oh yeah, just evacuate. Come on, guys. But if your entire life is set up there, if you've got a small holding where you have, as you can see here, goats and whatnot, it's very difficult to say, oh yeah, I'll evacuate and just go, like, all of these animals are going to die. Like, that's my entire livelihood. So this is how I make money. So I'm going to move out to somewhere that's going to cost me money, or I'm going to be put up by the government or by a charity, but I have no way of doing it, having income. And these are some of the reasons that people stay. Okay, also many vulnerable people, etc., etc. But evacuation is a challenging subject. So anyway, just incredible. A guy packed in a car with his goats. Due to increased electricity shortages after Russian strikes and cold weather, Ukraine has implemented emergency outages for industrial and residential consumers across all regions. This will have an effect on the ability to make money, the economy, the defense and military industrial base that you hope in the west of Ukraine, they can still have regular power, because if you want the Ukrainian defense industry to get on it, you know, stand up on its own 2 feet and help to procure equipment for the defense of Ukraine, they need regular power. That is a huge challenge. And then finally, just a little note on, I really should keep that to an extra. Yeah, I'll keep that to an extra. That is well worth going through on an extra. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.